Having learnt about the if statement, we can now move on to the switch statement. They are closely related. There are certain times when you're trying to execute conditional code where the if statement is the most appropriate, but there are other times when the switch statement is the most appropriate. Let me give you an example of when the switch statement is more appropriate than the if statement. Imagine if you had a if statement that read something like if x equals 5, and then you execute some code if x equals 5. And then underneath that you could have else if x equals 6, and then some other code. Else if x equals 7, else if x equals 12, else if x equals 115. And so on through a whole different series of what x could possibly equal. Now that is a perfect candidate for using a switch statement. Let me show you what a switch statement looks like. In brackets we put an integer expression. Now that is similar to, but not the same as, one of those conditional expressions that you've seen before. After that there are brackets which enclose a series of case statements. Each case statement is supposed the different values that the integer express could take. And the statements that you can see there indicate the code that should be executed if the integer expression happens to equal that particular value. At the end of each case break statement. Finally, down the bottom we have a default. I'll explain what those are. Now, let's go to some code and have a look at how that all hangs together and what all the bits mean. This is age3.c, which is a slight variation on age2.c, in that I've introduced now a switch statement. So let's look at how it behaves. We have right here. That is the entity to be evaluated. Notice, and this is quite important, that inside the brackets, inside the parentheses of a switch statement, you cannot have things like if age is less than 12, if age equals 16, if age is greater than age plus 1, or something like that. You can do no comparisons. You just put an integer inside the brackets. That's an absolute limitation. The only thing that can occur inside the brackets here is something that evaluates to an integer. You can put an expression like age plus 6 or age minus birth date or something like that, as long as the number that you end up with evaluates to an integer. And then you create a series of cases. Case 1, case 18, case 21, and these are all the possible values that age could have. So if age equals 1, then you execute this code here. If age was equal to 18, you would execute this code here. Now I've just got a single printf for each one, but you can actually execute as many lines of code as you like. You could execute 100 lines of code right there if you wanted to, right there. Now it's also very important that each one of these values after the word has to be an integer literal. That means you cannot put a variable there. You cannot put a variable there, couple there, or anything like that. It actually has to be a number or something that evaluates to a number, such as a hash define. And don't worry, we'll learn about hash defines later. In other words, a constant. So it is very important that you know that you cannot put any kind of variable there after the word case. Instead of 18, I could put 10 plus 8, and that would be okay because the compiler knows that 10 plus 8 always equals 18. So, how does it all hang together? Well, the compiler comes in here and evaluates the value of this particular variable or expression. It works out the integer that corresponds to that. It then jumps. It jumps down to either there, or there, or there, or there, or wherever to find a value that matches whatever age turns out to be. And I'll tell you in a second what it does if it doesn't find it. But supposing it does find it, let's say that age happens to be equal to 18, then the compiler will jump down to this line here and continue execution from this point onwards. And it will continue executing lines of code down, 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 down until it encounters the word break. If it does not encounter the word break, it will continue not to the next case, it will actually continue all the way to the end of the switch statement. Now what that means is, if I take out the word break there, and age happens to be equal to 18, then we'll come in here, we'll print out, now you can vote, and then we'll continue on down. And we'll go right past this line that says case 21, and we'll end up on this line that says you have come of age at 21. And then we'll keep going. And now we encounter a break, which means that that is all we print until the end of the switch statement. I'm telling you that because it's absolutely vitally important that you remember to put in the word break at the end of every case. It's not mandatory that you do that. You may actually want it to continue down into the next case every so often, but typically you don't want it to do that. So you've got to put, after each of the words case, you've got to put the word break. And it's quite easy to forget to do that. I can't count the number of times I've actually forgotten to put the word break in, and it's actually executed 2 different sets of code. Okay, so now suppose that none of the cases happens to match the value of age. Well, what will happen then is it will look for something called default. Default is a very special word. It essentially means, if you think back to our if statement, it means else. Else, it didn't match 65 or 100 or 40 or 21. It matched none of those, so we could print out this instead. So if age was, say, 66 or 42, then this would be what is printed out. Your age is nothing special. Now, if you did not have a default clause, and it's couldn't have one, they're not mandatory, then nothing would get printed at all. In other words, if a case does not match the value above, then no case is entered whatsoever. There's no error message. It simply does not do any of those things. Okay, one final thing before we move on. It's actually possible to have 2 different cases do exactly the same thing, and I'll show you what that looks like. Case 2, I could put case 2, and I could even put case 3. Here I could put as many as I like, and case 1, case 2, and case 3 will all do exactly the same thing. In other words, they'll all print out congratulations on making it through your first year, even though that message is now slightly wrong. It's also possible to have a case that does nothing at all. So you could say, okay, for case 18, I want just to break. Now that means age happened to be equal to 18. Whereas if age was equal to 19, now you can vote. And if your age is equal to anything else, you get your age is nothing special. So for 18, you would not get your age is nothing special. You would get nothing whatsoever. So that's pretty much it for the case statement. As you can see, it's a few extra words to learn. You've got to learn the word switch, case, break, and default. But once you've learnt it, it can make considerably. The only thing that you have to remember really is that this must always be an integer, and these must always be integer literals, or at least integer literal expressions. If you remember that, then you've mastered the switch statement.